Okay, we'll get underway. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the latest in our series of business masterclasses. My name is Stuart Davis. I'm a member of the employer engagement team here at Gower College, and it's my great pleasure to host this afternoon session, albeit that's going to consist mostly of just a brief introduction. I'm hoping that we'll be able to post some questions at the end for Louise as well. As I mentioned, Louise Troen is our speaker today. Louise is VP of Global Content and Studios Marketing for Headspace, and we are very grateful to Louise for joining us today. Headspace has quite a remarkable mission, actually. It's to improve the health and happiness of the world. And I'm not sure I've read a more laudable mission statement than that. And it all centers around supporting meditation, sleep, stress, and mindfulness. But prior to this role, Louise also spearheaded the international expansion of dating app Bumble. It's not an app I'm familiar with, Louise, but I look forward to hearing about that as well. And to achieve that, Louise managed teams throughout Europe and Australia. She's an expert, as you'd expect, in brand marketing, communications, and strategic growth, and has worked with global giants such as Samsung and Google. We look forward to hearing more about all of those things, Louise, and it's my pleasure to hand over to you.
Thank you, Stuart. I think that might be the best introduction I've ever had. Well, so I might be hiring you in future just to be my hype man. That was brilliant.
Definitely better than my introduction this morning.
No, Bruce, yours is just as good. Just as good. Well, thank you both so much. And just before I scoot over to my presentation, we had a wonderful session earlier with some of the students. But I wanted to say that I'm super excited to be here. I have a personal passion for kind of bringing my journey to more people, to kind of help inspire them in their own journeys and experiences, and also sort of share the knowledge and the challenges I had along the way, in the hope that they can help you in your journeys as well. So I'm just going to check, is my screen sharing?
Yes,
we can see that.
Great. So yeah, as Stuart just mentioned, I've spent the majority of my career, close to 14 years now, working in brand marketing and communications. I've always had a vested interest, without actually realizing it up front, in brands that were mission driven and purpose driven. And as I reflected back and wrote this presentation, it was actually quite incredible to see the consistencies in a lot of the roles that I've had without even knowing it at the time. And so I'm hoping that today it can help folks that perhaps are in a position where they're thinking through the next 5 years of their career, or are kind of looking for tools or resources as they look how they shape their own leadership styles, through some of the experiences that I'll touch on. The kind of red thread throughout my career has been my belief and ambition to really leverage brand marketing and marketing overall to change the social and status quo at play. And that can be gender equality with Bumble, it could be sustainability with Formula E, obviously more recently at Headspace, it's mental health. But I genuinely and sincerely believe that brands have a duty and a responsibility to create long-lasting change. And I also believe that there's a way in which you can deliver business return, growth, and legacy at scale in a way that has a knock-on good effect on the world. And some of the brands that I've worked at, most of the brands I've worked at, have been able to deliver that whilst also growing healthy businesses. And I think that for me is the kind of sweet spot of my career, in terms of it's all very well working for a mission-driven company or reflecting on your principles and values, but unless they are actually able to operate within a ecosystem of commercial viability, ultimately you just become a charity or a non-profit. And so the kind of sweet spot of the companies that I've worked for is that the more the businesses have grown, the more they've been able to take their mission and purpose and values-driven ambition to more people. And so it's sort of the self-fulfilling prophecy. And in the previous session that Bruce hosted, one of the questions at the end was, what is your life goal? Which was, brilliant and very open and ambitious question. And my feedback was really just to leave a legacy that changes someone's life for the better. And it doesn't always have to be at such a grandeur scale of redefining regulation or changing policy, but it can also happen on a real minor scale of changing 1, 2, 3 people's worlds because they felt the impact of something like Headspace. And I touched on it in a bit in the presentation, but I talk about the fact that minor turns throughout your career and life often lead to major growth. And I sort of believe that that's the kind of impact of my career and where it's taken me. So I'll be talking a little bit about that today, and also why your mindset is your greatest asset as a leader, as a teacher, as students, how you approach your practice, your classroom, your leadership style, your delivery is everything. I really believe that you can teach most things if you have the right attention from the people you're trying to teach. But what you can't teach is attitude and ethic, work ethic in particular. And so those are our biggest allies when it comes to career growth and development overall. So yeah, just briefly kind of breaking down the kind of short hour we have together today. I'll touch a bit on my personal journey through communications, moving to America, and now ending up at a pretty significant global brand. And then I'll talk briefly about where marketing has been and where I think it's going. And then also around leadership. I'm vehemently passionate about leadership being such an important skill. I think identifying what your leadership style is critical to the team that you lead and the work ultimately that you produce. And more importantly, how you show up in a working environment should be an extension of how you show up in your personal life too. And if you can evolve and develop that internally, you have the ability to lead a happier and healthier life yourself. So just quickly touching on sort of the range of experience throughout my career. I think the first thing to mention is I have had a very chaotic career. It probably looks interesting kind of on paper here, but I really stumbled across a lot of these experiences without much methodological thinking behind me. I was drawn to people and companies and products, but I never really sat down and wrote out the suite of companies or brands that I would want to work for. I was always led by my interest in work, campaigns or products, but also by leaders. I never took a job working for someone that I wasn't crazily inspired by. And you know, I can say very confidently that from my first job at Freud's, where I worked with Airbnb and Vodafone, to my CEO at Exposure, where I had clients like Converse and Uniqlo, to Whitney, who hired me at Bumble, to my previous boss at Formula E, who was the entire reason I moved into motorsport during a pandemic, and to my current boss now at Headspace. I've always made sure that the combination between work opportunity, passion, and leadership in terms of my ability to lead, but also the people I worked for and with, kind of ran at the heart of the jobs that I took. So I briefly mentioned this to the students earlier, but I started my career coming off the back of a degree in sociology from Bristol. And this was born out of me really just finding consumer behavior really interesting, or I should actually say just cultural behavior is interesting. I hadn't even really got to the consumer piece at that point. I was really interested in the way that people interacted with each other, how cultures and societies were formed, where the notion of community came from, how communities functioned in different parts of the world, how that then informed industries forming, and really just seeing kind of the building blocks of how we as humans interact with each other. And baked into that was a component and various modules of policies and politics and philosophies, schools of thought that sort of all began to curate these cultures internationally. And so when I kind of entered the workforce and got this opportunity to intern at Freud's and work for Airbnb, I was really interested in this notion of a second economy, that there was a brand that was opening up doors to people's homes and providing this kind of shared economy culture into different markets around the world. So that was sort of my first angle in, and was also working for Vodafone at the time. They were another client of ours, and they had real scaling ambitions. They wanted to take Vodafone to more people around the world, except they already existed in every country, and they'd obviously launched, quote unquote, in every market already. So this was much more about how do we take them into new audiences, given that they are already a global brand. And the way that we did that was launching a fashion collaboration with a big designer at the time called Richard Nicol. This is 10 years ago now, and creating what at the time was the first ever rechargeable bag. You know, now there are suitcases, and I'm sure Apple do a million products that do this, but at the time it was pretty revolutionary. We were taking a leather tote handbag, and we were building inbuilt charging in it with Vodafone's technology. And then we were launching it during Fashion Week and gifting them to all the fashion editors to keep them fully charged during the most iconic weeks of the year for them, you know, especially when they are focused on using their phones and taking pictures of all the shows that they're seeing. And I found that experience really interesting, that you could take a product which in essence, you know, Vodafone is I hope they don't mind me saying this, but not the sexiest of brands. It is very functional in what it offers. I think when you and I think of Vodafone, we think immediately of the technology and the functionality, but you don't think of this big brand mission. And so this was really about helping Vodafone expand its footprint into a new audience and expanding their mission to keep the world fully powered. And we started that with the fashion industry. So that really started my interest and passion for thinking more diversely about brand work and weaving in cultural nuances, consumer behaviors, different categories and industries, and really using the backing of kind of sociology and philosophy to help build that thinking and that messaging. And then I actually decided to move to the States. I've been working at Freud's for a couple of years. It's a brilliant company, incredible clients, but you know, you sort of have a review process every couple of years. And at the time, you know, I was not earning really enough to live in London, and the job was in London. And so I knew that they paid better salaries in the States, and there was a visa at the time that enabled you within a certain period of leaving university to go to America for 18 months. And so I found a company in LA. They were a small, very bespoke PR firm. And they represented talent, and I'd never done talent before, but I really loved the idea that, you know, I was looking and getting excited about brands like Airbnb really opening up the kind of second economy space, but from a consumer brand perspective. I really liked the kind of partnerships work that I'd done with Vodafone and taking a brand that really didn't exist in one category into another in a meaningful way. And so it felt natural that I should try something new, like working with talent or thought leaders, knowing that every brand that I've ever worked with or seen has always worked with talent in some capacity to amplify their message. And so again, sort of grabbed both horns of the brand and talent work, so to say, and just kind of went for it. And I hadn't had a lot of experience or any experience really working with talent, but sort of felt like I could do it, given that they were brands in and of themselves. And so my first sort of client roster were people like Paris Hilton, Gene Simmons, Afrojack, an EDM DJ. And really my role here was taking them out of category. So Afrojack was a DJ. We were trying to get him a deal with G-Star Raw, a fashion brand. Paris was in reality TV and was trying to get a music residency in Vegas. And Gene was obviously part of the rock band Kiss, and at the time was trying to get into sport and had just bought an American football team called LA Kiss that we had to go and launch in Orlando. So a lot of this was completely new territory for me, but the consistency of taking a brand or a product and identifying the themes that made sense for them to expand into these new spaces was something that I was really interested in. So I started working a lot on brand strategy. And when I say brand, I mean them as people. You know, you and I are also versions of brands in and of ourselves. And really a brand is about identifying what it represents and what it stands for, and then finding the similarities between the new spaces. So specificity was really important in terms of what they were passionate about, but being broad with ambitions was also an important one too. So I was there for a couple of years, ended up coming back to the UK just for personal reasons, and took a job as the director of a lifestyle and sort of fashion division at a small but very culturally on the mark agency in central London called Exposure. I had clients like Uniqlo and Converse, and really I started to again exercise my passion here for really democratic brands. I think that's a good way to define them. You know, you could buy a pair of canvas sneakers for £25, but what you bought into was creative expression and this representation of freedom and the ability to express yourself in any way you felt fit. And Uniqlo really was pretty revolutionary at its time. We launched them in the UK. They were doing very well in Japan at the time, and they really revolutionized the UK high street. You know, they took accessible technical products that you typically had only seen in brands like the North Face, or you know, Nike was starting to do a lot of technical sneakers and jackets for running and things like that, but you'd never seen it at the price point that Uniqlo offered it at. And what they did, which was so beautiful, is they took the Japanese cultural concept of minimalism and kind of simplicity, and they built it into their vision and mission as a brand. And their philosophy was simple made better. How do we take simple products, a white t-shirt, a pair of socks, a rain jacket, and make them better quality? And then they sort of paired that with a really incredible price point, because they were producing at such mass levels. They could afford to create it at an affordable price point. And so I really loved the way that the Japanese way of being and thinking from a cultural perspective paired with the kind of sophistication of its technology, but presented at a price point that everyday people could buy on the UK high street. It really meant so much more than just an affordable white t-shirt. And, you know, it still is reaping the rewards and benefits of creating that brand feeling and sensibility. And that, I think, is really what was the bedrock of their success. And so all of this was in the communications world. But as I was working with my clients at Converse and Uniqlo, one thing that I really, really was interested in is getting involved at the beginning. So instead of being handed, you know, a collaboration that Uniqlo did with another brand, or Converse saying we've got a new pair of sneakers coming out, basketball shoe, I kind of inserted myself at the inception point where it says, like, what are the brands and who are the talent and what is the content looking like, so that by the time it was handed to us as a communications agency, we were part of what would be newsworthy, so we could sell in the headlines that were important. And really, that's all that marketing is. It's about saying, what are the assets that we need? What are the insights that we're basing those assets on? Who's our spokesperson? Do we need a spokesperson? What is the content that we're creating to bring this to life? And then really, what's our position in society and culture? What's the news agenda talking about? What are people talking about? What's trending on our social platforms? And can we, in a way, engineer ourselves to be part of that conversation? And if the answer was no, it wasn't the right time to launch something. But that's when I really started getting excited about marketing, having had no experience or having, you know, not studied it. And then I met Whitney Wolfe-Herd from Bumble, and there was a role to kind of help market Bumble in the UK. And at the time they had launched in the US, but they were very new to the UK market. And I was hired as the director of international marketing. And I'd already been working for a short while with Whitney at Exposure. They were a client that I had brought on. And I really kind of was grateful for the challenge that Whitney gave me, given I had no experience in marketing in the past, but really felt that I'd had a lot of the lived experience. You know, often people say you can school yourself in X subject, but it's really about the kind of school of life experience when you're out in the field actually doing the work. And I think looking back retroactively, I was doing a lot of that marketing sort of by default. So I took a role at Bumble, working as the director of marketing for the international regions, and helped launch them in the UK, France, Germany, Australia, New Zealand, the Nordics, and Holland. And then was there for close to 3 years and was promoted to VP of International Marketing. And then I left shortly before the pandemic, and was actually doing some consulting when I got introduced to someone called Henry Chilcott, who had been a former marketing director for McLaren. And he was explaining that he was building a team at Formula E, and they were really looking to be ambitious of taking sustainable motorsport to the entertainment industry, and took a role working under him on his team. And this was really exciting for me because it was a completely new space. Again, you can probably tell my red thread is sort of jumping at challenges that typically I don't have the experience in, but I have the understanding of how to market to an audience effectively. And I love the idea of, I'd never used a dating app, but Bumble approached me. I'd never thought about using a product like Airbnb, but I thought the concept was interesting. I had never watched motorsport, but I loved the energy and visceral feeling of Formula One as a brand. And so for me, joining these companies and working out why I hadn't engaged with them when they were really up my street in terms of what I was passionate about was a real interesting challenge. But sadly, COVID hit and we weren't traveling to any of the races, and that was a real incentive to join the company, just given how passionate I was about different cultures. And it just was a coincidence that Headspace reached out, a headhunter reached out to me and sort of presented this VP of international marketing role. And at the time, seeing so many people struggle with their mental health throughout the pandemic, it felt like the right decision to do something that was so cause and purpose related from home. And I really needed and felt passionate about doing something bigger. And so jumped at the opportunity to run the team here from the UK. And I think before I touch more on sort of Bumble and Headspace in particular, these are some of the kind of headlines of campaigns that I help run. And I think what's really important when you think about marketing is that, for me, campaigns are everything. They're a way for us to marry insights, your product use. Why should your product show up at a moment when insights are telling us X? How do you bring that to life through content? Again, what are the talent or the people that you're working with to take that to the masses? And then again, what are your headlines? And I always come back to headlines. Even now as a marketeer, my team will say, why do you care so much about the PR headline? And really it's because that headline should encapsulate everything that you're trying to say as a brand. As the recession looms, Airbnb want you to make money through your home. Really, that's what the brand represents. That is absolutely what they stand for, opening up the shared economy and providing a second income at times of crisis, especially as we look to the next year. Yes, it might be a canvas pair of sneakers, but Converse is really about unleashing creative expression. And when you wear a pair of Chuck Taylors, they can be as filthy or as run down as possible. In actual fact, the more run down they look, the more of a story they tell. And really that's what the brand is based on. The work that we did with Bumble, we did an amazing campaign where we put more women behind the camera to create more stories that women could tell in front of the camera. And the way that they connected with the campaign was through the app. So we were telling the mission of the brand and of the business, but we were doing it through a really innovative way that put the product front and center. And similarly with Uniqlo, as the brand has evolved, it's done incredible collaborations with really, luxury brands that typically the price points would be impossible for the everyday person. But they continue to democratize access to high quality. And I think that's what all these brands have done, is they've created really sophisticated positionings, but for accessible price points. Whether it's Airbnb and you're staying somewhere for £50 a night, whether it's a pair of sneakers, joining Bumble free, or whether it's a t-shirt that you buy from Uniqlo. Everything that you see on this slide, and Levi's was another client that I worked for, which was exactly the same, an affordable pair of jeans, but really high quality. And I really love that notion of brands, that you don't need to compromise quality, luxury, sophistication, functionality for price point. And it's something that I really represent as an individual. You know, I think values, morals and principles are free and they don't cost us anything to act with integrity. And so, you know, just because you might not have access or privilege or, you know, certain tools at your disposal, it doesn't mean that your personal values and boundaries and principles ever need to be compromised. And I think these brands also speak to that. The other thing that I wanted to touch on was the importance of your tagline or your statement as a brand. And that's the same as an individual. You know, I often say to my team, I think they would be able to tell you this back, which is probably frustrating for them, but I'm always saying never ask for permission, always ask for forgiveness. I mean, I empower them constantly to make decisions. And, you know, one of the biggest learnings I've had is if the decision can be revoked, make the decision. And then if it becomes to a situation where we need to figure it out, I'll be there. And if it's a decision that is so big that it can't be kind of mediated in time, let's have a conversation about it. And that's sort of my personal tagline, if you like, because I think if we don't empower our leaders to make decisions, we end up in a situation where nothing gets done. And I'd rather us learn and optimize along the way than be stuck at a bottleneck with my approval. And I really should have taught and trained and guided and developed my team enough to make those decisions. And if they're making the wrong decisions and not asking for permission, that's actually on me, because ultimately I'm in service of them and I'm only as good as the decisions my team are making. And so this was the tagline we landed on for Bumble. And this is a really interesting one when we're thinking about how simple it is, but really it's so much more than making the first move. Yes, you make the first move in the app. That was really important, that functionally you made the first move. But really what we were doing was encouraging every woman everywhere to make the first move in love, in friendship and in business. And whether that was asking for a pay increase, whether that was standing up for something in the office that you didn't feel was right, whether that was going up to a guy in a bar. You know, we were reverse engineering these systems and expectations that had been set against us as women. And in doing so, we were encouraging women to go after what they want. And when more women went after what they want, we were very, very slowly chipping away at the gender disparity that so often exists and continues to exist. And the way that we did that in the brand work was being very simple, brutal simplicity about what the brand mission was, but also touching on what the product offered. So, you know, this is a great copy line that the team wrote. Being the CEO your parents always wanted you to marry, but then finding someone you actually like on Bumble. This was an empowering statement that really helped people understand what Bumble was looking to achieve. And, you know, subsequently, the types of men that joined the app respected and responded to the mission statement, which ultimately meant better matches happened when you have like-minded people using your product and connecting. Change accelerated. This was Formula E's tagline that we worked with a brilliant agency called Uncommon on. And this was about taking what was quite often just thought of as a motorsport and racing series, but actually reminding people that this was about the race for climate change. You know, racing with electric cars and providing entertainment, but in a sustainable fashion, when the alternative was arguably damaging the planet. It talked about, you know, not just the entertainment and the exciting races that were happening in Seoul and many countries around the world, you know, including Paris and New York and Santiago and you know, across Asia still. But this was really about the race against climate change. And so again, taking a sentence that reflected the sport, but also did so much more than that. It talked about something bigger on a cultural level. And, you know, we raced at the time, I think this is representative of Mexico City here. But we built a campaign that really touched on all of the cultures that we raced in, but also that was paired with a pretty incredible voiceover of the realities of where we stand from a sustainability and climate perspective, and that, you know, by watching and supporting Formula E over other motorsport that perhaps wasn't so kind to the environment, is that we were taking one small step to potential change, which again, from a vision and values and purpose perspective, felt really important. especially based on our kind of current climate anxieties. And then headspace, where I am at the moment. I feel so grateful for working for a company that is encouraging the world to be kinder to their minds. It might feel ambitious to have a mission statement that is a healthier and happier world, but we genuinely and sincerely believe that the more that we start with ourselves, the better we can be for others. And it has a knock-on network effect on the people that we surround ourselves with, from our partners to our colleagues, to our friends, to our parents, to our children. And this was always about starting with yourself and starting with the breath. There are a lot of concerns and anxieties at the moment around economic expectations and where we're going to be over the next couple of years, but breath work is free, and meditating, once you've learned the practice, can be free for you to really lean into every day. And we have a 14-day free trial. We also have a lot of free content on our YouTube, and this was really about ensuring that people understood the value and benefits of meditation. Our founder, Andy, he started the brand after being a monk for 10 years. He lived a very humble existence and really lent into the ability for meditation and being present with our breath and selves through mindfulness could have on many things, but most importantly, the tolerance that we have for ourselves, the gratitude we have for everyday environments, the kindness that we offer to ourselves and to others, and the simplicity of all of it. We spend our lives overcomplicating and worrying about things that are so out of our control, and yet the very things that are in our control, like our breath or our ability to tolerate challenging situations, we just sort of rush past. And I mentioned this on the call earlier, but if you think about something as simple as brushing your teeth or washing your face, these are preventative measures. We don't start brushing our teeth when all of our teeth have fallen out, except we only really start taking our mental health seriously when we start to feel depressed or we start to lose sleep. And what we're really looking to do is reshape that, especially as we look to the younger generations. How can we bring mental health and mindfulness support into the education system so that we're teaching these preventative measures, so it doesn't take a child feeling angry before they know how to tolerate it, or we don't end up in a situation where a young person is bullying someone because of the pain that they're feeling. We are addressing that up front so that we're creating a kind of environment for us all. And also that's kind of embedded in the content we create. This isn't just about broad sweeping statements about meditation. It's actually remembering that mindfulness is often quite tangible as well. Speaking about women in particular, this campaign we ran in June was really about sexual wellness and female empowerment, and recognizing that our ability to navigate relationships well, to feel sexually empowered, to feel at one with our bodies, to understand our fertility starts with our mental health. And there are many scientific studies to prove that our capacity to manage situations, yes, physically it's important, but actually, there's a reason why people say mind over matter, and the strength of mind that we can build, it's a muscle, and that enables us to navigate challenging situations in life that we all experience, quite often similar experiences, with more intention. And so when I sort of reflected back on my journey as I was writing this, I didn't set this out from the beginning, but I think it would have been really helpful to. This is sort of looking retroactively, but if you haven't done this exercise, I think it would be something that I would encourage anyone to do now. And most of the brands, if not all of the brands and work that I've either worked on or created, have been led with mission and purpose, but they have ensured that the product's set at the core of that. So, there's no point in talking about sustainability if I'm creating 1 million pens that are plastic. You have to ensure that your product speaks the truth of what your mission does. So if you're talking about feminism and female empowerment, how is your product doing that? Okay, it's encouraging women to make the first move across every area of their life. If you're talking about mental health, how are you making sure that from a social impact perspective, you're not just offering it to the everyday person, but you're also doing things that are good for society at large. This is probably the most important one, being commercially viable. It has to drive revenue so that you can invest back into the business, so that you can scale the brand, so that you can reach more people and you can do better work for more. It's really important. And actually, this is probably the most critical piece of advice I could offer anyone, is to work for a mission-driven company. You can often sway into the realms of non-profit and philanthropic efforts. Also culturally, you can work with an organization that perhaps aren't as commercially savvy, and it's really important to marry the kind of line between both, so that the mission that you're delivering has commercial viability, so that you can continue to invest in it long term. And that's really about identifying why the product is important and needed, what the competitors are doing in the space, and really what your USP is. What do you offer that they don't? Lots of people also often say, why and how can you differentiate between yourselves and Calm? And Headspace's main differentiator is, number one, we do not work with celebrities that don't meditate or use the app. We, I'll talk about it in a minute, but we've worked with people like Raheem Sterling, who genuinely meditate before they go on the pitch. We will only work with talent that are authentic and that can speak to the product experience in a really natural way. The other thing is that we're completely science-backed. We have research and development teams, we have clinical teams, making sure that this content is hitting the criteria that we need to actually have a scientific effect and impact on your mental health. And that really sets us apart. And then being culturally relevant. Why should I care? This is really important. Why should someone care about Headspace more than Calm? Why should they use Bumble and not Tinder? Why should they watch Formula E when the drivers that they like and that they are inspired by are racing in Formula One? And you should really ask yourself, any brand that you work for, or even any subject that you're teaching, why should they care? Why should the students care? Why should you care? Why should society care at large? And I think once you start breaking down, they should care because mental health is causing, 1 in 8 people to take their lives every month. Mental health challenges means that our NHS services can't present themselves in the most productive way possible. Women aren't getting pay rises at the same consistency that men are, which means we have more men in senior positions, which means we're not reflecting society. Half of society are women. We should be asking the questions, why should the consumers care? And then once we've identified why they should care, then we need to build product experiences that help enable that. So this is, a really ugly slide, but a really important one. The kind of concept of integrated channels is something that is sort of thrown around a lot, but it really is inherent to marketing. Marketing is about identifying your insight or your market opportunity, figuring out who the audience is that's going to engage with that, identifying what your product offers to solve that insight need and audience need, who is speaking to that with reach and visibility. That could be a celebrity, it could be a thought leader, it could be someone in the company. What content are you creating to tell that story? It could be an interview, it could be an ad campaign. What is your company doing from a social impact perspective to support with said insight? If it's about climate change, what is your perspective as a company on climate change? If it's about gender equality, what are you doing when Roe versus Wade gets revoked? You have to make sure that internally and externally you're honoring your mission and your vision in everything that you do. And that's also something that as individuals we should be striving for as well. And then creative, how are you bringing that to life in a way that is engaging and cutting edge? And that, as I said before, could be a really cool ad campaign, but it could also be an incredible social campaign that just launches on TikTok. And it really comes back to the insight and the audience. Where are that audience spending time? What are they engaging with? What do they need? Does your product offer it? Who do they care about to help you speak and get visibility of said product experience? And then what are you doing on a larger scale to show that from a business and an internal perspective? And then again, I always come back to the headline. All of those things, that's what the media want to talk about. When Bumble first launched, even the word empowerment wasn't really in the media agenda. Feminism was still wildly misunderstood. This was way before the Me Too movement. And so a lot of this was about owning that media agenda, but we needed insights about, you know, the gender disparities within both the dating space, but also the working space. We needed the product to be innovative. We worked with incredible talent like Jamila Jamil and, you know, Serena Williams, and really looked at these women that were changing the game in their industry, whether it was women of color, whether it was women in sport. And then we really, as a company, when I was at Bumble, looked at how we could support with regulation and policy from a social impact perspective. And then, of course, it all came to life in the Bumble look and feel. And that's similarly what we're doing at Headspace at the moment. So I think it always comes back to, why should your consumer care, and why on earth are you worth talking about? You know, I think that comms experience that I had from inception was really helpful to think through that. And then just a few snapshots in terms of my own Headspace journey. I started as the VP of International, so was really in charge of scaling the brand in regions from the UK to Germany, Australia, India. Now my role is global, but this is just an example of some of the work that I did when I first joined. This was really about, just going back to this slide, identifying our kind of insights and audience, which was that, you know, predominantly women use the product. We could have done a better job at diversifying our ambassadors and speaking to new audiences. You know, specifically in the UK, young Black males are often overlooked or underrepresented when it comes to the conversation around mental health. Culturally, it's a harder conversation to have. Raheem meditates, he uses Headspace, he used it during the Euros, obviously scored some great goals in the Euros, now heading to the World Cup, or scored in the World Cup. And so he was a brilliant ambassador for us. He spoke openly about his use of Headspace, about negative disruptive thoughts, about how it benefited him from a performance perspective. And then we took a bunch of content that he created with one of our teachers and we put it in the app. So this would have been a great campaign if we'd just stopped at the ambassador piece, but the key component was, how does it exist in the product and how can we help people go on the journey that he went on? So if you head into the app and try the kind of 14-day trial, you know, after this conversation, you'll see what that 7-day Headspace meditation looks like. And it's really focused on his personal journey. We worked collectively with him on it. We did not tell him what the section should be, what the conversation should be. He worked hand in hand with our hugely experienced teacher, Dora, to craft that with her. And it meant that the way he talked about it and the way he shared it was really authentic, and it was a real success for the company. And then we also launched in India. So this was an interesting one, just given that, you know, Headspace is a meditation app and India is the birthplace of meditation. So we did not, or I definitely did not want us to take Headspace to the market in a, you know, very evangelical way and say, we're bringing meditation, when, you know, it's the birthplace and meditation is woven into the very tapestry of their culture. So this was much more about, take a moment to meditate with us. And the sleep stories and casts that we have, they transport you to the Himalayas or to the Bengal forest. And we are showing up in a really localized way. And instead of dictating to the market why they should use us as a meditation and mindfulness platform, we instead championed the fact that the country had such a rich culture of meditation and offered them specific collections and content that spoke to that audience in a really authentic way. And that was through partners, that was through talent, that was through stories and sleepcasts that talk to the Indian culture. And you'll see on the bottom right, we had a few really interesting and cool copy lines like recharge your mind that we had around the city at charging stations, so that people could, whilst they kind of waited and charged their phone, could do some Headspace meditations as well. And then now I run our content marketing team. So yeah, it's been a very fast journey for me at Headspace. I've been there 17 months and now I'm running our global content team. And this is really about, instead of putting our markets or brand front and center, this is about putting our content front and center. So I think after the Raheem work that we did and some of the sleepcasts that we did in India, I really got a taste for how powerful content marketing is. And I really believe it's the future of marketing overall. So lots more of that to come in the work that we do. So I'm just going to do a time check. I think I have about 5 minutes just so I can get some questions. This was a really important one for me in terms of the themes that I sort of picked out from my journey. Integrity, growth mindset, execution and output, and then having fun. This is sort of how I hire. These are the questions that I ask when I bring on new people. It's also when we do partnerships, I ask them about their values. And they're also pretty aligned with the companies that I've worked with across the board. And so one of the things that I suggested to the other group was that and many of you might have already done this, but only took me really over the last year to look back at my career and identify what mine were. But I think it would be a great exercise as a teacher, as a leader, as a senior marketeer, whatever it might be, to identify what your values are and explain them to the people that are around you, whether it's your relationships with friends and family, whether it's the teachers and the other colleagues that you have, whether it's the students that you're teaching. I think starting with where your value system is and explaining to them how you will be tolerating the classroom or behavior or ambitions is a really powerful way to keep groups aligned on a mission. And a mission doesn't need to be improving the health and happiness of the world. Of course, that is amazing. That's Headspace vision and mission, but you also can have your own individual one. And it could be to empower a generation of students to go after what they want, or support a new generation of students to stand up for causes that matter to them, whatever it might be. I think starting with your expectation of yourself as a leader is a really powerful way to bring folks along the journey with you. And then just added this guy in for fun. I'm sure if I asked you what campaign this was, you might struggle to tell me, but this was actually a Diet Coke ad from probably about 1995. And it's just to show you how far we've come. In the past, brand marketing didn't really put the product or content front and center. It was all about selling a Carl's Jr. burger with a very attractive woman in a bikini eating it, or selling a Diet Coke can with a man who's half naked cleaning a window. It was more about selling a fantasy, not the specifics of the product. And if you look where we've come, 25 years nearly from then, what you'll see here is it's much more about inclusivity and social impact and purpose. For Diet Coke to have, a diverse pair of hands, love what you love as their statement, the product front and center just shows you the direction that we're moving in. And I really believe that we're going to keep moving in that direction, especially with the economic climate we're moving into, limited brand budgets, these big Super Bowl ad campaigns, they don't necessarily work anymore. Putting your content front and center, if you look at The Handmaid's Tale, they promoted that show, not Hulu as a streaming platform, which The Handmaid's Tale sat on. Similarly with Masterclass, they don't do brand marketing. They put the people who are on the platform front and center. And that's exactly how we're thinking it through at Headspace. We put our members front and center. This is a recent campaign we launched for World Mental Health Day in October. Instead of us telling everyone, be kind to your mind, like we did a year ago in India, this is Sakari, who is an actual member who struggled with a breakup, who is representative of many women across the States, who went through one of the healing courses with our meditation teacher, Dora, and she speaks about the experience she had. And we have a wealth of other real stories from real members, a complete diverse audience and cross-section of individuals that speak to different audiences across the States. But we put our content front and center, and we put our members front and center too. The other thing that we do, which is really important, I mentioned this before, is we show up how we say we will show up. We have 4-day working weeks. We have Mind Days every other Friday, which is a non-working day. We have extensive benefits, which include things like paid egg freezing for women who might be in a situation where they can't afford that. We have Headspace free for the unemployed in the States. We have it free for the NHS in the UK. We obviously have lots of content around different subjects. More recently, because of the conversation around mindful sex and body image, baby loss, in light of Roe versus Wade, we really show up and we ensure that we focus our content and our campaigns on what's important, knowing that that will help the brand at large. And then this slide is just about, I briefly touched on it before, but large ad spends are moving in another direction. I don't believe that they're going to be the future. I don't believe that we can measure return on them. More localized content campaigns is where I think the industry is heading. Specificity is your friend. These broad sweeping statements, we need to get more specific about what we're telling people and the impact of our products, and testing and experimenting is the best way to do that. We call it A/B testing in different channels, where you have one message in one and one message in another, and you see how people interact with that. Helps you build really strong hypothesis for how you should show up as a brand. And then the power of partnerships is really important. Leaning into shared partnerships, even if you don't have any budget as a small brand, finding another small brand. If you are a community app and they are a content app, powering yourselves together to leverage each other's audiences is a really beneficial way to grow your brand and business. And then just some kind of top tips with regards to how to win in the consumer space overall. I really believe that putting your members and customers front and center is the way to do it. Personalizing their experience so they feel seen, heard, and helped. We are moving to a much more personalized model at Headspace. We're introducing goal setting next year to help follow people on their journeys. Attention spans, I think we all know that it's about 6 seconds. I'm thrilled if you've managed to make it this far through the presentation. It's about 6 seconds on most social platforms, about 4 seconds now on Instagram. So what are you showing in those 4 seconds? Impact first, show the value add as quickly as possible. And again, put your members front and center to do that. And then as we head into the economic climate and crisis that we're going into, don't focus on reduced cost. I think lots of brands think that it should be showing discounts is the way to do it, and actually it's about showing the value and not leaning into the economics so much, but saying, look, we know it costs £7 a month, but this is the value that you'd get from it. Don't be afraid to talk about value adds. I think quite quickly people move to talking about reduced cost as quickly as they can, but if your brand and product adds value, you should be shouting about that. And then these are the last couple of slides. And this is just about, as I know there are teachers and leaders in the room, and I think it's really important, and I sort of wish I'd done this even at a more junior level, to identify your values and principles up front and be the advocate for your own brand. Don't necessarily tolerate behavior that compromises that, but deliver it in a way that people understand it. Keep building it, both in the classroom and beyond. There are ways in which all of us can continue to upskill and up-level ourselves. That might be speaking at other schools, that might be creating, your own leadership blog about the kind of teacher industry overall. It might be starting something to do with young enterprise. I think as a leader, we can constantly be evolving our own skills, but also empower others to lead and help them to be autonomous in doing so. The other thing I think is really important is feedback. I absolutely love feedback. It should not be seen as a criticism. I think I even emailed the team that are helping me with this presentation and said, does Bruce have any feedback before I go into my next one? Because I'm so open to bettering the experience for people. And I think, the more that we can provide feedback to students and ourselves, the better that we'll all become. And then I briefly mentioned this at the beginning, but major growth is the result of many seemingly minor turns. This is a really, really powerful statement for me. I think sometimes when we feel like we failed in the classroom or that we didn't get the result that we wanted, we can often see it as a step back, whereas actually, being able to pivot and turn, that's how we grow. And the amalgamation of all of those minor turns ultimately and always affect major growth. And I think my experience is testament. I had a lot of minor turns that really could have gone really wrong, and I think having the right attitude and working for the right people and the right brands enabled me to reach the kind of growth that I have so fortunately been able to work on. And then just a quick note, I'm sure many of you are aware, with Adam Grant and Simon Sinek, they're two of my favorite leadership coaches, both psychological academics, and they're really brilliant. I think if you're a leader working with challenging students or colleagues or any environment really, which is inevitably going to be challenging at some point, he's really great at kind of distilling thinking around what you should be doing as a leader, and he's one that I've really turned to help curate my own leadership style, to stay authentic in how I deliver, to look at my goals, to stay really, really focused and close on how to build good cultures. You know, one thing that's really important to me is I set my team project deadlines. I don't set them time that they have to be in the office or on their computer. I don't care where they work from. I really don't mind the hours that they work. We have specific check-ins, but ultimately I do not want to glorify or glamorize insane work ethics. This is about insane work quality, and some people can deliver a 9-hour presentation in an hour, and that is the kind of talent that I want around me. And so I would really encourage anyone on this call who hasn't defined that leadership style for themselves to explore that. Because most importantly, and this is why it's crucial to build great teams and great cultures, you want everyone working in the top right-hand corner of this cross-section. You want people with high levels of engagement, you want people with high well-being, and you want them to be flourishing as happy workers. You don't want people that are good at their job that are disengaged. You obviously don't want people that are focused on you know, having a low well-being experience because they are distressed, but they're still delivering. That doesn't lead to a sustainable workforce. So leaning into these components and identifying what the values and kind of principles you stand by will make your team feel seen and loved, and ultimately creates happy employees, which creates good work. And yeah, my last kind of point to leave you on to think about is really just about leadership overall. I know lots of you are in really high positions of responsibility and are leading classrooms, and I think, you know, my brother's a teacher, and I really am so humbled by the work that teachers do. And I think, you know, you are schooling and developing the future generations. And if you can have a knock-on effect and impact on one person and the change that they ensue in the world, I think there is nothing more valuable than that. And so I just wanted to say, as part of that the most critical part of that is that you lead yourself before others. You know, the common saying that it's impossible to fill someone else's cup before you've filled your own. I would really encourage you to identify your leadership style, your boundaries. That's another really important one. What you tolerate versus what you don't, how you empower others. I think having that sense of ownership and confidence as a leader will only make others respect you and will enable you to do your job as brilliantly as possible, which, you know, I have no doubt all of you are doing already. But you are the most important person in your story. At any stage, at any point, you can start writing it again. And yeah, I hope you have the kind of courage to lead yourself before others, because the roles that you're doing are integral to the future and future generations. So yeah, from my side, thank you for doing all the work that you're doing, and thank you for listening to me today.
Well, thank you, Louise. That was a quick hour, and I think that's testament to how enjoyable that was. It was a fascinating overview of your personal journey, which you set out to tell us, and your professional experience came across so strongly as well. You've been good enough to share so many thoughts, give so much insight into your world, your career, your approach, and, you know, perhaps your opinions, which are so important when we've got someone of your standing sharing their time with us, is to really get an insight into what you make of things. And I know we had a lot of managers and marketeers that would have been totally absorbed by that. So thank you. And I know you've just done it, you know, just an hour or so previously. So my feedback with energy levels and content were fantastic. So thank you very much for that. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions, but whether we have the ability for people to raise their hand in Teams if they've got a question to ask, or we'll just set everyone free. But if you can put your cameras on, if you're going to do that, and I'm going to start things off, Louise, if you don't mind. At the beginning, you know, I set out what you've achieved to date. I think a lot of us would be quite overwhelmed by the sheer scale of that, both geographically, technically, whatever comes with overseeing things as you're doing, or indeed the scale of the projects. Are you able to contextualize that at all in terms of how you approach such major projects and geography?
Yeah, of course. I think the most important part was that I never, you know, now looking back, I think it looks quite overwhelming. I probably would not even apply for those jobs looking back at that slide. But I always, if you can imagine sort of a staircase, I was always looking at the next step, and I never really looked further than that. So yes, there were like, 500 steps here, and it probably would have seemed really daunting to go, right, how am I going to be the CMO one day of Nike? Like, let's say that was my dream position. It was always, how am I going to work for a company that I care about? Okay, we got to that step. Okay, how am I going to work for a boss that likes me? Okay, I got to that step. So it was much more about small, minor, what felt like minor decisions along the way that felt really achievable. That now that you look out, 10 years into, 15 years into doing it, it feels like a really sufficient journey. But at the time, they were all just one small decision. The other thing that I think is really important is, don't worry if you don't know something. When I moved to America, to be really frank, I remember calling my mother crying on the flight to Orlando, being like, I have absolutely no idea how I'm going to pull this off. And she was like, don't worry. If it goes wrong, you can just come home. You can just come home. And I was like, 26 years old, shouldn't really be calling my mom in that situation. And I think it was more, I genuinely went with this attitude of, what is the absolute worst that can happen? I can try my absolute best to get this right. And if I don't get it right, I've just learned a lot along the way. So I would say the first piece of advice is just figure out what that first step is. Wherever you are now, however your role is, whether you're thinking of changing your job, or uninspired by the people you work with, or wildly inspired by the people you work with, what's the first thing that you can do in the next 3 months that can inspire you to make the first step? And then alongside that, do not worry if you don't feel equipped to do it. You figure that out later. Start the wheels turning now, have the right conversations. There's so much information out there that helps you to learn. There are so many people that even in just an hour's conversation, you can get so much knowledge from. So figure out what that step is, number one. And then number two, work out the different variables of access and free information that you need to start that ball rolling. And I give you my word that as you move through that process, your confidence will grow with that. I mean, I think I also had the benefit of probably being naive at 25. But I would say now, anyone on my team, I had a woman on my team recently who was like, I was interviewing her and she was like, oh, I just don't have this and this experience, but I have this experience. And I was like, I want you to reframe that sentence. And I want you to explain to me why your skills that you currently have are transferable. And she explained it brilliantly. And it was just interesting watching a woman, and often they say that women do this more often than men, say, I've gone down all the job spec and I can't do these two things. You can do those two things. Tell me that you've already done them, because in your role that you've been doing, in some iteration, you actually have done it. It's more the fear and the imposter syndrome of the society we live in is so heavy that actually what you're better off saying is, I've not done this specific role, but I've done these 7 other things that are really transferable, and I know I can absolutely deliver it. And I think that's the thing that we need to retrain ourselves on, is your potential is limitless. And I really believe that, but you almost need somebody to see it and remind you of that.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else wants to ask Louise a question?
I can't see any hands up.
Okay, well, in the absence of that, I've been making loads of notes, Louise. I'm going to keep you going for a little while. Okay.
Sure.
I wanted to perhaps more of a challenging sort of question, so much as in a general sense, we're going through times of austerity. Businesses are feeling it as well. And from a personal point of view, I've worked for boards, organizations where when they're trying to make savings, perhaps one of the first things they look like is the marketing spend.
Yep.
Have you faced that challenge, and how do you, how do you fight the corner for marketing and return on investment when we're going through these difficult times?
So we very recently faced that at Headspace, and I also faced an iteration of that when I was at Bumble as well. I think, brand marketing, and when I say brand, I mean big ad campaigns, are always going to be challenging to measure return, because they're often based on awareness and they're often based on engagement. And when we move into these economic times like we're moving into, CFOs, boards, investors, they want to see immediate sign-ups, they want to see immediate revenue, and they want to see return on investment. But the way that you can operate around that is, number one, strategically reminding, because often these folks don't come from a marketing or consumer background, them on the marketing funnel. The marketing funnel has been, it's an age-old, very straightforward funnel, but there is a reason why sign-ups and conversion is more efficient when you do a better job at the top of the funnel. When your awareness and education is more, when people comprehend your product better, the likelihood that they're going to sign up for a higher price is greater. So as long as you can explain that theory, number one, is really important. The second piece is having the right measurement tools. So just saying to a senior leadership team, but we saw 3 points of improved aided awareness, in all honesty, often doesn't mean anything. I've sat in so many rooms where I've said, but we're up 3 points. And someone's gone, but what is that? How does that I don't understand. What does that translate into revenue? And it doesn't, because the way that it works is that sort of exists in the ether until you have all the other components of the funnel to draw people down through to conversion. The most important tool that we have currently is an agreed measurement tracker of all the content campaigns. Now we run content campaigns, but they also service the brand, where we have sort of 5 variables of how we measure. And the board are really methodical and specific about having measurement tactics. So as much as it's difficult to kind of persuade them on the value of brand, having really tangible ways to go up front, this is how we're going to measure this campaign. It's a combination of immediate indicators, and those could be reach, engagement, sentiment on social, creative, like how do we think the creative performed? Then the second piece is typically sign-ups or free trial starts. So does that have a knock-on effect after 30 days? Then we move to engagement. How are the current existing members in the app engaging with it? And then we move to brand awareness at a 3-month period. So we give ourselves the time to measure, but we also are delivering some of the metric points that web traffic, for example, that's a really easy one to measure. The board can see, okay, we saw a 25% uplift in web traffic from that brand campaign. Yes, we haven't seen any signups yet, but we know that as the campaign evolves, we can convert that web traffic to X because they put their emails in, for example. So it's much more about the explanation and schooling of the language, and then B, making sure that you've agreed up front what those measurement tactics are, rather than going into a room after 6 weeks and saying, marketing awareness has improved by 2%. I just don't think that's a viable argument anymore, especially in the climate that we're seeing. But I still really believe in the value of brand. I just think we can do that in a way where content comes first. And I think the likelihood that people are then going to engage with the product because the content is front and center is going to be greater.
Thank you. I just want to go back as well to, it was a central theme throughout your chat. It surfaced time and again, the importance you attach to the values of the organizations that you work for. And no doubt you did your research ahead of joining them, but I suppose then it migrates into culture then as to whether those values are being lived in the day-to-day and the decision making and the behaviors. Have you ever had a clash where you've thought this isn't quite, I wouldn't expect to name the company, but has it always been a smooth transition, or have you felt when you've gone to places sometimes they're not living their values?
I think at several companies I've worked for, the values that are positioned externally aren't as rigorous internally. Headspace is incredible and probably is the best company I've worked for in terms of actually supporting their employees to the same degree of which they present the brand, not only from a benefits perspective. I mean, our benefits are amazing, but more from the leadership perspective. A lot of our senior leaders have kids. We're remote working. We're very flexible with people's calendars. It's a really kind environment to live in and to work in. But I will say there have been two companies probably that I've worked for in the past where, as the company has got bigger, the internal commitment to the mission has felt like it's been compromised. But what I will say to that is that as leaders, and this is why it's such a privilege to be at my position, you always have a chance to define and the opportunity to define it for your team. So even if things around you are happening, you know, the 6, 8, 10, 20, however many people have reported into me, that's something that I can hold fast onto, and it's something that I really, you know, take seriously. And I think that's one of the biggest privileges of being in a position like you are, or I am, or the teachers are, is that regardless of whether you don't agree with certain things around you, you join a company because of what they represent, and you have an ability to shape that.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And just finally, bring it back to marketing. What's the best bit of marketing advice you've received or could give to marketeers that are tuning in?
Probably, so it's probably something quite recently actually that I've learned. We did something called a DMA test for one of our campaigns in America, and it's basically where we took 5 pieces of content. So we took 5 member stories, a young Black woman, you know, middle-aged white man, an Asian woman, very kind of cross-representative group. And it's called a direct market assessment. And we basically tested each of their different pieces of content in different states around the US. So it's really an experiment to see which markets relate to which stories and individuals more than others. And then we take that away, and it helps us identify future campaigns and the creative, the talent, and the channels that we use. So instead of saying we're going to spend X million on this campaign and put it on YouTube and Hulu and, you know, these media titles, we've actually done a complete test and kind of heat mapped all the states in America, and then we have specific content going into them, and we can measure the uptick in interest in each of them. And what it does is it helps you really acutely figure out what that specific state are engaging with. And so then what you can do is go, okay, the Midwest need this, the East Coast need this, you know, you could do it with Europe, you could do it with Asia. And it helps you to identify very specifically the types of content you're creating. So many brands, they just keep pushing stuff out into the market without really understanding the specifics of what the Midwest or the Deep South or the East Coast American wants to see and engage with. And so as we evolve our member stories platform, we're going to be looking to do a lot more of that testing, and you know, as we look to scale and expand the brand, we'll probably do the same. But I would say any company that you work in, it doesn't have to be on that larger scale, but test different creative, different channels, and different content. Well, different creative of the content in different channels is the most powerful asset that you have, and that could literally be TikTok versus Instagram. It could be, you know, the New York Times versus the Guardian. Just see how it affects the knock-on effect of your sign-ups or engagement, and have that inform your decisions, not, you know, a data team sat up here that don't really feel close to the content or the kind of culture that you're trying to change. But it's called a DMA test, and I've actually never done one anywhere else other than at Headspace, but we've definitely learned the most from that than anywhere else.
Great, thank you. Right, just before we finish, I just want to check that no one else has got a question to ask Louise. I can't see any hands up, so actually,
we got Paul. Yeah, Paul.
There we are. Paul's come in. Paul, over to you.
Hi Louise, how are you?
Hi Paul, I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, really good, thanks. Really insightful. Thank you very much for that. I suppose my question is around, I'm thinking about our own organisation, and it's the link between the sales and marketing functions. So have you got any tips in terms of how they can work in harmony?
Yes, so we typically, when I joined, our kind of B2B and sales team sat very independently to the marketing team, which is actually not how it should be, mostly because we see a direct correlation between the campaigns that we run and the knock-on effect of enterprise clients reaching out to us. We did a huge campaign in Berlin, and our web traffic of people interested in our B2B service increased by about 25%. So I think the most important thing is having alignment on the types of things that sales, or the conversations that the sales team are having, so that marketing aren't over here creating, you know, a collection on mindful eating when the sales team are saying, we absolutely need this in another language because we can upsell it by X% in these markets. So I think having that constant connect, because really marketing, and now definitely for Headspace, we're in service of the B2B side of the business. So one of the kind of pieces of feedback we got from our sales team is we can sell this at a higher cost if we lean into more clinical content. And now we're looking at stress programs, sleep programs, potentially things like medical care and CBT. And that really came from the sales team saying, this is what we need. So I think it's more about finding that balance between what you represent as a consumer brand, but also making sure that the consumer marketing team feel incentivized to work hand in hand with the sales team. And a lot of that is down to kind of the leaders of the two functions having the right collaboration and also sharing as one team. It can quite quickly be siloed as, the sales guys do all the hard work and the marketing people like me get to do all the fun work. And really it's about, how do we partner as two functions so that when we're doing a deal with Raheem Sterling, we're offering him to do webinars or 3 or 4 webinars for our sales folks as well, because we know that will help them sell into big other sporting clients like FIFA, for example. I think it's about, mostly about collaboration, but also understanding of each of their roles. There's almost so much misunderstanding, I think, in terms of what people do. We have these things called road shows at Headspace, where you literally do a road show and you explain what your team do, how they can help, why they should collaborate with you. And we encourage all functions to do that so people can see the value add on the business.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any more for Louise?
You can always pop me a message on LinkedIn if you're shy.
Well, there's a lot of us going to be watching the Headspace journey with interest now, Louise. You very much put that on our map, and with mental health being such an important issue, we're all wishing you every success with that. But mostly, we'd like to thank you for the huge commitment you've made to Gower College this afternoon, speaking to the students and our employees and our business partners as well. So thank you very much for all your efforts this afternoon. It's been a fascinating masterclass, and thank you from everyone here at Gower College.
Thank you, and thank you all for giving up your precious time on a Tuesday afternoon. I really appreciate it as well.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Louise.
Take care. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.